Well, he's a Nazi apologist, and he's a worse historian than he is a politician. He's factually inaccurate. He ought to read Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. He ought to study what the Nazis did, including when Hitler came to power in January 1933. He ought to look at the events of that year. He ought to see what the first, second, third thing that Nazi regime did, who it targeted and why. He ought to look at what he and his political leaders said about Zionism, and then he should reconsider why he's said these hugely offensive, grotesque remarks. The timing is calculated and offensive as well. He should not be sat on Labour's National Executive Committee. He should be suspended today.
Right. Ken Livingstone, what do you say to that?
Well, I'd simply say to John Mann, go back and check. Is what I said true or not? And the BBC, you've got a huge team of researchers. It will take just an hour or two to go back.
But what's the point?
But
what's the point?
Because I was asked a question, I answered it. I have never, in 41 years since I won my 45 years since my first election, I have never lied. I've always answered the question.
But you seem to be implying that, and by the way, I don't think it's entirely historically accurate, because they'd already started attacking the Jews when he came to power, and Kristallnacht followed not long afterwards as well.
But it wasn't an attack to say he was going to deport all the Jews.
But you always seem to be implying that, oh, well, he wasn't such a bad guy because he just wanted to deport them all, but he only went wrong later on. I mean, people will think it's unbelievable what they're hearing in British politics today.
He was a monster from start to finish, but it's simply the historical fact. His policy was initially to send all of Germany's Jews to Israel, and there were private meetings between the Zionist movement and Hitler's government that were kept confidential, only became apparent after the war, when they were having a dialogue about whether or not to do this.
Right. I mean, John Mann, do you think Ken Livingstone is anti-Semitic?
Yes, he is, and his rewriting of history. Well, he's factually wrong. Hitler was not a Zionist. Hitler blocked any attempt to get Jews into what was then Palestine. And the reason he did so, and he said so, and it was expressed, was because a Zionist state would be an international Jewish conspiracy and a base for it. Right. He said it in Mein Kampf, and it was said, indeed, his foreign minister specified that in great detail in 1937, outlining why they weren't prepared to allow Jews who they wanted to get rid of to leave to go to what was then Palestine, because it would have created this power base for an international Jewish conspiracy. Hitler was not a Zionist, and to suggest so is so grotesque. It's calculatedly offensive. I think you've lost it, Mr. Livingstone. I think you need some help. It's a deliberate, calculated attempt to cause problems, to stir up hatreds. What are you on at the moment? Right. You certainly shouldn't be on Labour's National Executive.
I mean, do you understand how those remarks, you say you're telling the truth, but how they would upset a whole community, how they would upset people who lived, survived or died during the Holocaust, to be used in any sort of comparison today?
What John Mann just said isn't true. I've not said that Hitler was a Zionist. What I said was his policy in 1932 was to deport Germany's Jews to Israel. That doesn't say I agree with it.
But you said it earlier today. Are you withdrawing that?
I never said it.
Are you withdrawing it?
What I said was that was his policy. It was followed by private conversations between the Zionist leadership and Hitler's government about whether to carry out that policy. He didn't.
I invite you
Is this edifying for the Labour Party?
That you are raising these points about the early 1930s at a time when the party faces a crisis of anti-Semitism in its own ranks. People will be baffled that this is what you're doing, Ken.
I'm not raising these points. I was going to plan to have a nice quiet morning in the garden until suddenly I'm descended on by all these journalists saying, is this true, is that not true? Well, I'd be much happier just to do the gardening. So it's a nice day out.
At least, which can't be said of all politicians, you've been here and you've answered the questions. And
you can't say that of all politicians.
And that's exactly what I did say. We can't say that of all. And we're grateful for that. People will make up their own minds about what you're saying, and we'll let you go back to your garden.
Thank you.